Bring this, what time is it? 10:03, so the meeting comes to order at 10:03. Beth, can you do roll call, please?
Austin,
Present.
DiDonato,
Yes, present.
Dilger,
Yes, present. I'm muted.
Dombrowski,
Present.
Jacobson,
Here.
Kim,
Here.
and Rosenthal.
Here.
Also present, we have Malinowski and Stoneburner, CCS.
Are there any additions to the agenda? Okay. Public comment. I don't see any public here to comment. Did you receive any emails with public comments? No.
I did
Right.
not receive any comment.
Okay. Item 5, approved minutes for the December 11th, 2020 meeting. I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second, Jim.
We've got Andy and Jim.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Beth, can you do roll call, please?
Austin,
Yes.
DiDonato,
Yes.
Dilger,
Yes.
Dombrowski,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Kim,
Yes.
and Rosenthal.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's everybody approved and nobody against. So the next is the 21-22 budget review. So Rebecca, I'll let you go through this budget. Thanks for sending it to us early.
Okay, I'll try again. Yes, so there is still some work to do on the budget. I want to be clear about that. In particular, the development fund component hasn't been worked on at all. So we'll start with operating. I have some notes to go over, and then I'm happy to take questions as well as we kind of roll through it. So on the first tab, and my screen is shared, correct? Cool. On the first tab, we have our operating fund, OCLC billings and individual library charges. Those are just placeholders at this point, and as you can see, they correspond in both income and expenditures, so it's kind of like a wash when we're looking at increases, et cetera. We do have both some decreases in spending as well as increases in proposed spending, so we'll talk about those. Our rent and utilities, I think, are one of the only components that don't have like a tab. So utilities, we budget based on our monthly spend, which has been fluctuating based on whether or not we're in the office and how many people are in the office. Our rent does, as you'll know if you were previously on the committee, have a built-in increase every year. So that changes in September each year. So Beth has done our math here. So we have our regular sort of 2% increase there. Any questions on this summary page? And we can come back to it too. The tabs are kind of where the meat is. So I'm going to jump to the ILS tab. Down here, you can see a bunch of my worksheet math, which I will not keep in the document that goes to governing board. But that was just so I'm making sure I was putting our various invoices in the right fiscal years. Our contract with Innovative is like May through April. So we do split that across fiscal years per our auditor and accountant's request. So one thing you'll notice is in previous years, we had additional lines for licenses that we purchased with library editions and other components. As of May of this year, those are all going to be wrapped in with our regular annual renewal. So that'll be a little bit less bookkeeping for Beth and the accountants. We did also do an early renewal with Innovative. So we essentially added 3 years onto our contract to get a lower annual increase. We talked briefly about that at governing board and more extensively at executive committee. So overall, there is, it looks like a 6% increase in our ILS subscription. But when you look at those additional licenses being wrapped in, it actually says it's a decrease largely because they stopped billing us for a component of our subscription. They stopped using it. They're developed, like they were contracting with a third party and now they're doing it in-house, so they don't bill us anymore. Okay, there are no questions there. I will keep cruising. Personnel does have a higher increase than we've seen in previous years. And actually we need to do a little bit more work on this sheet. In terms of salary, we did a benchmarking project with HR Source that we are working with executive committee on. And we do have a couple of staff members who we want to adjust their salaries to be more in line with the HR Source recommendations. So, you know, pending some further discussions with executive committee, we are looking to give people a little bit more of an increase than we would have done in previous years. And then that will be partially balanced with some folks who are, you know, maybe not overcompensated, but compensated a little bit more generously with not getting sort of like a standard increase across the board, if that makes sense. I did this year for insurance benefits. I currently have budgeted for 1 employee change of election, as well as we have a vacant position as well. So then we have like a potential election for the vacant position. And then I do like to have a cushion in there as well because life events happen. And I was alerted this morning that there is a potential life event for another staff member. No one else is pregnant. We're not going to have another leave, but it sounds like a job change for a dependent. So that could impact our insurance spend as well. So at our next meeting, I'll have some updated numbers in insurance. And I'll look at those a little bit more closely. I don't want to grossly overestimate how much we need here, but I also want to be practical that if things change, we're going to have to cover it, whether it's budgeted or not. I also bumped the personal equipment reimbursement up a little bit from what we had budgeted previously, because everybody is working from home for right now due to safety concerns. Everybody is getting the $25 a month equipment reimbursement as opposed to just those folks who are on call. So I certainly hope that we're able to be back in the office, you know, late summer, early fall, depending on vaccination schedules and all of that. But I did budget a little extra here just in case.
So Rebecca, I think you kind of answered the one question that I had, which is that, you know, I see the reason for the increases, but the projection is actually lower. Is that because of an open position?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
so we previously had approved the a second cataloging position to do more like centralized cataloging work. And just with all the things, we haven't moved forward with fully developing what that's going to look like. So yeah, I do feel bad. Feel bad. We've had this budgeted for 1.5 years and haven't hired it. But it is going to be very helpful once we get them in. I feel really confident in that.
And refresh my memory, wasn't that a Spanish language cataloger?
So the exact position description is still up for discussion. We're still working on that analysis, but it is like, are they going to do special projects, local history, like maybe foreign language? We're still working based on what those needs are and monitoring what Rails is working on, because Rails is looking to add cataloging services as well. I think we can both do cataloging. I just don't want to exactly replicate what they're working on, because I imagine we'd have obviously more focused attention on the CCS members than Rails would be able to offer. The operating tab, just a couple of changes from when you saw it. I want to confirm with staff, but I'm planning to cancel the library systems newsletter. It's a fine newsletter, but it just, I feel like a lot of the information is available elsewhere, and it's, you know, not a favorite of anyone on staff. So just looking at that. And then I had a typo, business cards I had as $3 as opposed to $30. We can't get a lot of business cards for $3. So. Any questions on this guy? All right, so Datacom is our like telecommunications stuff. So we have our office fiber, which also includes, to get our bundle pricing, we had to get a second internet line, which it's like $40 a month. So that's just bundled in with the office fiber since it's coming from the same company. We did have a billing issue with them initially, which is why, for those of you on the committee last year, you may remember the budget number changed between meetings, and that was because they were invoicing us incorrectly and then figured it out. And then the telephony service, we are looking at potentially changing that service in the future in conjunction with our office move. Right now, those are physical phone lines to our office. So we are continuing to explore options for virtualizing those. So then we can have a virtual server and VoIP calling. That would, in addition to not needing hardware in our space, that would potentially see some cost savings. We want to do some more testing and exploration before we take away our phone lines. I actually had a question for the committee on professional development. Obviously, our projected spend this year is significantly less than we budgeted because we're not going anywhere for very good reasons. I'm wondering, in terms of your budgets for next year, are you budgeting your sort of standard amount or less? Like, how are your organizations handling this?
I haven't started my budget because I'm in July 1. So yeah, I do know, I mean, ILA is going to be virtual. So I'll probably recalculate that for more people, but no travel, because that's kind of what we're seeing, like with ALA midwinter, we saw more people attending, but no travel or food or, you know, any of those expenses.
Yeah, I'll echo Jeannie like word for word there. I mean, we're a July 1 fiscal. We don't anticipate a lot of travel, but we do have more people participating in conferences because it is a virtual environment. So kind of an in and out there.
At Glencoe, we just started a new fiscal year setup. So we're January 1 now, and we dropped ours by about 15.5%. So we don't anticipate a lot of staff traveling for at least the first half of 21. But we have budgeted for travel in the second half of the year if that becomes more available.
Again, this is Jim at Round Lake. I would second what, or third or fourth, what Jeannie's already said. We're in the same situation. We'll probably cut back a little bit.
Okay, yeah, I will go through this again and pull back on some of the travel, or like, and we've been breaking it down into in-state and out of state just to keep ourselves straight. I mean, it's all the same budget line. But I'll go back and look at that again before our next meeting. Cool. Thank you for that. Anything else on this tab? Insurance, no big changes here from last year. We did budget a potential 10% increase in the LIRA package, just in case, because we don't know what that's going to look like. We have a small decrease in our treasurer's bond based on the recent decision to move from 100% of our assets to 50% coverage. So we see a little savings there. And then it looks like our quote for workers' comp is decreased from previous years. So nothing too exciting there. Oh yeah, there's some stuff going on this one. Our building special assessment last year, our real estate taxes went up by like literally 300%. And they reduced our common area maintenance to some degree to help compensate for that. But then mid-year, the real estate, I think they had a successful appeal. The real estate taxes went down, but not all the way back to where they were. So we are planning to come in a little bit less than we had budgeted for the remainder of this year. And then we're budgeting less for next year based on the updated numbers. So that building special assessment is our real estate tax and our common area maintenance. So with a relatively recent change in property management, we get a monthly invoice for common area maintenance, and then you know, there may be a small adjustment at the end of the year. Previously, they just waited till the end of the year and then sent us a giant bill, which was tricky. So this is better for sure. And I'm glad that property taxes went down some. The items that are in blue for FY21-22 budget are all related to CCS web properties, hosting, domain names, DNS, SSL stuff. With the CCS web project, when our new site launches, those are all going to be wrapped into our new hosting fee. But I do want to keep them in the budget in case that project gets delayed for this year. Year one of all the website stuff is going to come out of development. So we're not double billing and operating for this. But we are planning like a July launch. So if something needs to be renewed before we get that far, I'd just rather have it in the budget than not. And then in future years, we'll see some changes to this component as well. Our friends over at ICN, they just didn't bill us for like 8 months, something, which did include part of more than 8 months.
It's probably been a year now, actually.
Cool. So some of those months that they stopped billing us were in last fiscal year. And they, after many attempts at contacting them, they have started billing us, and we do owe them some back. Oh no, they haven't yet?
That's what I mean. We haven't received the backlog of invoices, which I think is the 8 months, but we also are not receiving the current monthly. So it really is probably a year now.
Okay, so maybe follow up with them again, Beth.
I'll follow up with them again.
Yeah. We are expecting to get a really big bill from ICN that will in part be for last year. So what is nice is that our monthly bill hasn't changed in like the several years that we've been working with them in terms of co-location. Like they're not increasing costs every year, but we are going to see some weird stuff in the budget this year when they finally invoice us. The issue, maybe more background than you need, but we had a dedicated fiber line going to the ICN, or we had a dedicated fiber line to the office that it was an AT&T tunnel with ICN service. It was very expensive. So we removed that and now have just a regular business internet. So when ICN stopped billing us for that fiber service to our office, they mistakenly stopped billing us for our rental of their facility. So we've been trying for a year to get it straightened out. Beth and Marcin are on it. It's a very small budget item, but I am planning to not renew the emergency closing center next year. We send everything out via email and on our website. We have registration for all of our training. We can contact our attendees directly if needed. I know it's a small fee, but it's just not a service that we've used in 3 years, and I don't imagine we'll use it in the future. And then I have less budgeted for contract positions and project help. Well, part of that over the next year, we're going to be disposing of some surplus equipment from the CCS office in preparation for our move. That will not cost $5,000, but we also sometimes bring in outside trainers to do work as needed, like for SQL mostly. Great, my screen share controls are in the way. Capital, we are projected to spend less this year than we had anticipated, and we talked about this last month or in December, this last month, largely due to supply issues. We're just not able to purchase the items that we had been planning to purchase. So some of that spend has gotten pushed to next year. Marcin is continuing to monitor what's available. Everything that we're planning to replace is just sort of like ongoing maintenance, like replace our switch in the office every 3 years. So nothing is dire, and Marcin would rather wait to secure some better pricing than scramble to in a weird tech bidding war. I don't know what's going on, but so we are projecting to spend less this year than we've budgeted, but then budget a little bit more next year to continue with some of those replacements. And then electronic resources, it looks like there's a pretty significant increase here, but this is really because we've added libraries. And I think one of them wasn't included in the previous year's budget due to timing. So it is more, but it is split between more libraries. So members would not be seeing like a 10% increase in their fees due to this. So then all of those numbers wrap up here back to our summary sheet. Based on the numbers as they are now, we'd be looking at an overall 1.5% increase in library billings, again, split amongst more libraries than we had previously. I am going to go back and adjust some of those numbers. Professional development will go down, but insurance may go up. So we could see some changes before next month. I'm happy to take feedback on the budget overall, and then just a quick kind of overview of next steps would be if we're comfortable with things sort of as they stand now, knowing we need a few tweaks. My next step is to then apply to finish the development tab, and then apply the membership fee formula for your review at our next meeting.
So I have a question on the operating fund there at the bottom. Do we normally budget an amount to transfer to development, or is that decided at the end of the year?
That's a sort of yes and. So in previous years, we've budgeted an amount to transfer. In 2021, for example, we didn't budget an amount to transfer because we had enough and we didn't want to like overbill to transfer money. We did end up under budget, or we're projecting that we're ending up under budget, for various reasons. So closer to the end of the year, Mick, as our treasurer, will approve a transfer. The accountant will recommend an amount, and then Mick will approve that transfer to development. So I would recommend that we don't budget a transfer to development this year either. because we will continue to have a strong balance there. In other years though, Jeannie, to answer your question, we might say like, oh, we want to get overall $25,000 into development. So let's build that in.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Well, I don't have any questions. I'm ready to move on to 21, 22 next steps if nobody else has any questions.
Same.
So I'm just gonna pull up the agenda to make sure I'm not missing anything. Yeah, so our next steps, as I said, I will make those adjustments that we talked about, and then we'll put in an estimate for OCLC billings. We typically don't get that actual OCLC number until May. Last year, I think it was actually June due to changes at the state library. So we'll calculate the member billings. We'll have an estimate for OCLC. And then at our next meeting, which we have scheduled as March 12th, our goal would be to recommend the budget to the budget and associated billings to governing board for the April governing board meeting.
Okay, so I do have another question about OCLC billings then. I know Palatine's was pretty large. Is that already factored into your 318 that's projected for this year, or will that come on in the new?
That is already factored into the 318 for this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, because you've already been paying it, so it's in our projections for what
Okay.
we're expecting, and then I just copied that over.
Got it.
Just as a placeholder.
I kind of just have I guess, throwing out there on the salary line item. So for districts that with the CPI of 2.3, we're anticipating, that increase in our tax revenues this year. So are you comfortable with CCS having a salary budget increase of 4%? And does that reflect, are you comfortable with that, even if it doesn't reflect the amount that you're able to increase your salary budget for your own staff? Are we looking for CCS to reflect what the libraries have to do as well? Just a question.
I mean, I'm happy to get other feedback from the committee on that. What my intention would be is that we would use, the CPI to kind of set the cap for like our standard increases. So like my salary, for example, like I'm like right at the midpoint for what HR source thinks I should be making. So like, that's great. So, my increase or like, I think Beth is right there as well. Those would be tied to that CPI component. And then, we'd make those other adjustments where we would need to. I'm happy to hear from the committee on if that seems appropriate, or if you would want us to, essentially it would just take us longer to get our staff adjusted as needed, because we'd have to make smaller adjustments over multiple years. So I'm happy to hear from folks.
I would vote, this is Monica, I would vote to make the adjustments now and then, use the CPI increase for the folks that are already at a reasonable salary. My last two libraries, I've been in the same boat, and it's just easier to take the hit one time and get everyone where they need to be, because then you can predict your salaries a little better going forward.
Yeah, I would agree with Monica. We did our benchmarking survey with HR Source in 2019, and it was a very painful process for my staff. We had about a third of our staff frozen in terms of wages and salaries. And we elected to just do it all in 1 year, just because we felt like if we had to do it incrementally over 2 to 3 fiscal years, we're just prolonging the agony with them. We felt it was like just kind of pulling off a Band-Aid saying sorry, but and then we just kind of reviewed the scale every year, and we have to make adjustments anyway in terms of the minimum wage law. But yeah, I'm totally fine with this. This makes a lot of sense to me.
Good. I'm in agreement. I just, as a committee, I feel like we ought to, if the rest of the board asks that, we have our sound rationale for why we're picking what we're picking. So good. Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, it's good. It's good that you brought it up, Lauren, because we definitely need to be prepped in case anyone has questions.
On board. Any questions about next steps? Okay. Then Mick, if you're ready, we can move on to development fund. And this will also, we've got development fund list and development fund policy as two related items.
Yeah, let's move on to that if everyone's ready.
So let's start with the development fund list. On the right side of my screen, the PDF is the version of the list that was looked at last year. Sorry, my dates just are not what I expected them to be on there. So yeah, I have two different versions of the list, but this one's pretty close. So we had
Rebecca, just for context, I think what we did was we reviewed the list, but that does say 2019. I feel like it's
Right, but we just finished December 2020. So this is, we're due to look at it again. 2019 was really only a year ago, if you're looking at December.
and then we updated it with the amounts separately, and that's why there's that December date.
okay. Time is just like a thing that doesn't exist in my brain anymore. Thank you all for your patience. So we have the list that was previously looked at. I do think there's a version somewhere without this pilot project in here because we did put that in our regular operating fund. And that's largely where my confusion is coming from. But either way, we need to update this list again. So I have in this Word version some changes. Part of it is just reordered. And the formatting needs to be addressed. I realize this looks crazy. So we had this is an old list because we don't have the website project on it. So I apologize that I pulled up the wrong one. So the website redesign consulting, that was in our previously approved list from February of 2020. Excuse me. What I've added here are the dates. That project is starting now and may continue into FY 2022. We have some of it budgeted. It's actually going to end up being a little bit more than $25,000, but some of it we're going to spend out of operating for this year because we have regular website consulting and project help in operating that we're not using for something else. So we have that in there, and I just moved it up because it's a thing that's definitely happening. Like it's in the budget, and we're doing it. The next gen products from Innovative, turns out I had really underestimated how much any of participating in these projects would cost. So we had previously said maybe it'd be $25,000 for year one plus some sort of setup fee. The actual cost is $77,000 for 1 year. Executive committee, as we talked about at governing board earlier this month, did approve our joining the development partner project. So unless we cancel that agreement before we progress further along, our current plan is that we would pay for the 3 years of the pilot program out of development because we have the funds available, and then we're not wrapping that into membership fees, and then we can reevaluate once we get to the end of that contract. So that is a significant change from $25,000 to $237,000-ish over 3 years. And I have 4 fiscal years listed there just because the go live date, will be subject to development schedules. We have our office space relocation expenses at the end of our lease. Mick and I were chatting briefly before the meeting, like what that office space is going to look like may shift as we continue to do our needs assessment, but there will likely be some expenses no matter what happens with moving things around. So our current estimate for that is about $30,000. Beth, are we still comfortable with that estimate?
Mhm.
Cool. Then I have a little gap here, and this was largely just for my note taking. We previously had open source development resources specifically for a CCS-wide app. After this month's governing board meeting, I don't know that that necessarily is something we want to keep on the list. However, our strategic plan does call for a deeper dive into analytics tools and kind of helping libraries use data in different ways. So I would propose we keep that as a potential use, but shift from developing a patron-facing mobile app to maybe some sort of dashboard situation for library directors or something. I don't know what that is. It's not something I would plan to put in the budget yet, but I think that is a potential use. We have a lot of expertise on staff, but if we were going to develop some sort of like shared dashboard, we would need to probably bring in outside help and or pay for a proprietary product. We have another item here, potential to offset costs of new library membership. We have sort of the estimated amount of services for one library. So at this point, those costs are covered by Rails grants. I think the thinking last year for the committee was if for some reason a library couldn't get a Rails grant, would we want to offer like a CCS grant to a library that otherwise wouldn't be able to join? So we can keep that or leave that as an option. Again, nothing here is binding. And then authentication tool for single sign-on is still on the list. We did a preliminary investigation, so this cost is pretty accurate, although it would probably go up a little because we have more libraries than when we started that work. Again, a lot of our libraries are using a tool already, whether it's a proxy server in most cases, or Indian Trails is pursuing Open Athens. To me, the value of this product is really more focused on an academic library and how like researchers use online tools more than a public library. I'm very comfortable leaving it on here as a potential option, but it's not something that I would prioritize in the next few years. If we spent all of the money on this list, it would be about $530,000 as indicated here. I added that total here just to give us some context. I don't think we're going to spend all of that money. I have no desire to spend it all. If we look at our development fund projections for this year, again, we still have to update that for next year. Even with these planned expenditures, because we've added libraries and gotten that additional investment, we didn't budget for a transfer, but we're getting a transfer. We still have plenty of money that we could buy all the things on the list this year and still have a balance. So that is something we'll want to talk about next meeting after we have the updated numbers for this year. Are there any other thoughts on adding or removing any items from this list or adjusting in any way?
I have a question about the second from the last one, the idea of a CCS grant for, I think you said a library that might not get a Rails grant. I'm very grateful for the Rails grant. I can't say that I found it very competitive. Are there libraries that don't get a Rails grant?
No, it would really be a case that if they had to stop offering it due to budget reasons.
Oh, okay,
Yes,
okay.
everyone that has applied for a Rails grant has gotten their full funding amount.
Okay. So that one seems like, I mean, yeah, I don't mind leaving it there, but it seems like a slim possibility that it's going to happen in the near future.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And like you were saying with the authentication tool, the single sign-on, like I don't necessarily think it needs to come off, but like the more I look at this and, you know, how many libraries are we? 27 libraries now?
28.
20, yeah, and it just seems like, and everyone's pursuing their own process, and it won't work with Lynda, it won't work with Hoopla, and other things like that. And so I'm not sure that this makes as much sense as it once when we dreamed of this 5 years ago, 7 years ago. So I'd also be comfortable with it coming off. And so I'd actually ask the committee to consider, they can talk to their IT people or however, we don't have to decide that today, but like, that's something I could see getting cut very easily.
It is something I'd like to talk to my IT people about, see where they are on it.
Mhm.
I'm just adding a note. If there's no other thoughts now, I will also go over this again with CCS staff before our next meeting, just to see, excuse me, if there's anything I'm missing or we should consider. And then we can approve it along with the budget, hopefully at our next meeting, or recommend it with the budget at our next meeting. So that brings us to, that is not the right document. That leads us to our component budget agenda item, which is a development fund policy. The question came up last year, do we have a policy? If not, should we have a policy? What should that policy look like? Lauren, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. We talked a little bit about it at our last meeting, but there wasn't a lot of conversation from the committee. And Lauren, I know this is something I think that you brought up originally, so we wanted to table it until you were able to participate in the discussion. So just to kind of update anyone, Lauren and anyone who wasn't able to attend last meeting, I did talk with our attorney, or not our attorney, our auditor about, you know, what does he think? What would it want to look like? And we use McLaren Sarah. So I talked with Paul. He was cautious about a specific policy that capped, that had some sort of like cap on a balance. He didn't say, no, don't do it. He was like, just be careful, because, you know, right now you have this really healthy budget and, you know, a really healthy fund balance, and you're happy to give these rebates and, you know, work with your libraries on that. But there might be a time in the future where CCS wants to build up that reserve fund, and now there's a policy that is limiting like how much they can gather in a year, or you maybe have to change the policy if you like have some cap and there's some project that you need it for. So he was urging caution. He didn't say don't do it. So I wanted to bring up what we have in our existing fiscal accountability policy, and then have another discussion with the committee before we decide what to do. So the development fund, it says that we may maintain a development fund and that we will review and update a list of potential uses. And that's about it. It says the governing board will review all fund balances not less than annually. And then I think a lot of times what we are are thinking about as our development fund, or one of the uses of our development fund, is actually our operating reserves. So we have over here with our beginning balance and operating, we have an amount based on our fiscal accountability policy that's going to be between 25 and 50% of the previous year's operating expenditures as reserves. We are keeping that close to 25% rather than 50%. So that raises the question. I think part of the question previously was like, should we set some sort of standard as to when we will, when we'll do a development rebate, or like if our planned transfer is, if our actual transfer is greater than our budgeted transfer, should we just do a rebate? Do we want some sort of policy or procedure in place? So I'm happy to talk about it and hear what everyone thinks.
Yeah, so I'm definitely in agreement with Paul. I would not want to write a policy that would tie our hands in any way. But right now we don't have any sort of guidelines for what happens to the development fund. We don't even, it doesn't even say in policy that we rebate it back, right? So, you know, just using this year as an example, if we were to spend everything on the, and I understand this is just a draft, but the draft development fund sort of wish list, which includes 3 years of expenditures on something, plus the 115 that Mick was talking about we could eliminate, that still gives us close to $200,000 extra in the development fund. So I think a policy with some sort of a guideline of, as we near the end of the fiscal year, we look at anticipated expenditures out of the development fund in the coming year, and then look at what the fund balance is, say some sort of guideline of what that delta would remain in there, what that difference would be. If there's 715 in there now, and we anticipate that if possible we could spend 540, then we might say 50% of that difference will rebate to the libraries. Or, you know, I mean, it would never be a dollar amount, and I would never want to deplete the development fund. And if by writing it that way, we could say if our purpose was to build up development fund for long-term projects, then when we put together the development fund wish list, we would say we want to have an additional $500,000 in there for X project, in which case the policy would still be perfectly valid, because we'd be saying we're only going to rebate back that which is in excess of planned development fund expenditures. Not even saying in the next year, but just anything that's on that development fund list.
I'm making notes. This is a question, not a counterpoint. Would it make sense for that to be, because we're talking about like guidelines, would that make sense for it to be a procedure rather than a policy, like an admin procedure? Or does it make more sense for it to be a policy?
Well, it's something that would only be done under board action. So I mean, I would think that would make it policy, or no, is that?
I don't know, I'm asking, not.
The other thing I like about it is by having it in policy is if there isn't a cheapo like me on the budget committee, then it's still written in there so that somebody will be planning on doing it in the future. So I just think it's the right thing to do moving forward, that, you know, that we say, yes, the development fund is for anything we think we're going to need in the future, and we are happy to fund it. But when we recognize that we have amassed excess funds, that we take a look at that every year and rebate back an appropriate portion.
So your suggestion would be that the policy would call for rebating, let's say 50% of the difference of the balance of the fund and the total of the potential uses.
And it could be worded as the goal of it is to, without it being set in stone. So we could say, you know, the goal is to rebate back 50% of the difference or 75% of the difference or 25% of the difference, you know, whatever the, but then we have in there that we are recognizing our responsibility to the libraries to take a look at when excess funds are being built up every year and determining if that needs to come back or not.
What was the percentage the last couple of years? Because how much did we do last year? 200 some thousand and.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the actual difference. We didn't specifically, I mean, we like looked at our potential uses, but we didn't do as Lauren is suggesting, which I think is a really good suggestion of, you know, comparing it to that total. And that is why I added the total to that page today, so we could more easily have this conversation. And previously it was just like, well, we don't want to go too crazy, but like we want to give some money, but like it was really pretty arbitrary.
Right, and I mean, that worked. I'm just, if like Lauren suggested 50, 25, 75, and if we want to go with that sort of idea, it'd be nice to like say, hey, last time we did 67, and then the time before that we did 55. So we did 60, you know, it would just give us a number that's based in reality instead of something that's kind of a gut feel for us if we wanted to go that route. And so that's why I was just wondering what it was. And we've given quite a bit back the last couple of years, like $400,000 or more the last couple of years. So we were quite a bit higher. And I think we're, you know, Andy before, and that we were doing a really good job with this and thinking around it with equity. So like, sometimes I hesitate with policies because then you're locked in, and even with the percentages, and we seem like this percentage makes sense, but 7 years in the future, we're like, why did they do this again? And maybe we'll remember, maybe we won't. So part of me is like, feels that another option. I'm not against rebates. I don't think we should overfund or underfund this. But can we just call it like, hey, the finance committee will look at this and consider rebates with what makes sense in that year? Because it could be like we're in 2007 and we're looking at 2008 and go, oh, that's not, there seems like there's some trouble ahead. Maybe that's not a good idea, or maybe we want to be even more aggressive because the libraries really need help. And being stuck at 50% or 75% or 25% might not make sense in that one situation. Just putting out there for discussion.
But if we word it like the policy that we currently have on the operating fund, the goal of CCS is to maintain not less than 25% and not more than 50% of the prior year's operating expenditures as operating reserves in the operating fund. If we word it the same way, we're not obligated under anything. I mean, we can have a goal for the development fund as well, that the budget committee each year can then determine, okay, I'm gonna make a change here, you know, I'm gonna take some action here to rebate, or I'm not.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea that Lauren has, and I think the real key component there is not to lock us into a percentage, but to say we have a goal with the development fund to potentially offer a rebate to the members, you know, based on what the performance of with the operating budget and the anticipated surplus. I mean, on the flip side of that, I agree with what Mick was saying. I mean, in the past, when the finance committee reviewed where we are in terms of operating and what potential rebate we could offer to the members, I think the committees in the past and the members in the past were able to provide something that was equitable and fair. But I think with some level of uncertainty with the consortium and how we've been growing over the years and such, it might help us. It might be a benefit to have a mechanism in place for the committee to kind of cite when we want to talk about this, when this topic does arise towards the last quarter.
I am happy to draft something for review by the committee for our next meeting. And also I can go back and look at the rebates that we've done over the past couple of years and see if I can get an estimate of like how those compared to our potential uses for the development fund. Excuse me. So we can have a further discussion at our next meeting about kind of where we'd want those levels to fall. Yeah, I'm much more comfortable with connecting that like delta, as Lauren said. I feel like that's safe and fair and reasonable. And like maybe, you know, to Mick's point, maybe we want to have like a range like we do for operating reserves, and that gives us some additional flexibility in addition to the wording of like the goal is to say, well, you know, the economy or, you know, member billings have been down or something. The other thing I think we should consider, when we originally did the rebates, we were essentially rebating money that had been collected for several years under various iterations of a membership fee structure. And so we just divided the rebates equally among all members because we were kind of looking at, you know, we built up this whole big fund in anticipation of an ILS change that had happened over, my understanding is like 6 or 7 years that money had sort of been accumulating. And then we changed the membership fee structure, and then we changed it again, and then we're doing rebates. So we're like, let's just send it back to everybody in equal chunks. So if rebates are something that become more operationalized and are more based on kind of like the current cash flow of CCS, like our current billings, should we apply the membership fee structure to the rebates? So those folks who have been paying more in are getting more back. Or do we still think that it's hard to like my original thing was like, I can't separate who actually put this money in because of all these changes we've been through. So are we still in that boat, or do we feel like we should be giving money back more to like in accordance with how much was put in?
I agreed that would be too complicated. You know, to remember that Grace Lake and Palatine came in 2020, and so, you know.
I mean, I would say that like once your development, like if you don't owe anything to the development fund, you're like in it. So I wouldn't say like based on how many years you've been a member, but like as opposed to just here's the number, divide by 28, is it here's the number, apply the same percentages that are applied to the bills. So like if you pay 4.5% of CCS billings, should you receive 4.5% of the total rebate amount? Not how many years have you been a member?
Is anyone asking about that? Has any library came to you and said, hey, we're paying more or we should be getting more back?
It came up the first time we did the rebates. And you know, at that point it was like, I don't know whose money this is. But if we look at like how much we've rebated over the past few years, do we feel like we've rebated that initial amount and now we're rebating based on our current membership fee structure? I think we could probably make that argument. Nobody's been knocking on my door about this. I just want to be cognizant that if this is something we're doing annually, you know, because rebates were new. I don't know the last time CCS had a rebate before. Does anyone else? We've got a lot of new faces on this committee. You know, if we're essentially taking money in and turning it around in the same year, is that a different situation?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think what you're describing makes perfect sense. And it is a relatively simple calculation if we're just saying, okay, ELA contributes 6% of the development money or 6% of the member money. So when it comes back in that 6%. You know, I mean, that's a very straightforward calculation. So yeah, I would think that would make sense, and it's easy to justify to the membership. However, I also think that would be procedure and not something we would need to develop to put into policy.
I have, it's not concerns necessarily, it's just the thoughts around the strategic plan and the, we've talked about equity a lot. And though I think this is manifestly fair, what you're saying, Rebecca, like, is this an opportunity for us to choose to support the less funded libraries? Even if it's only, I'm trying to imagine, it's like, we're talking $300 difference, right? Or $200 difference. It's not a huge amount of difference from, if everyone's equal and we're giving back everybody $3,000, you know, versus 6% versus 3%, we're not, well, I guess we're talking a little bit of money there. So like,
Yeah, I could run the numbers. Like so I would say whatever, like if we decide to make a change, it would be for next year. The rebate, any rebate we do this year, I would say we would still do the same, split it evenly, but we could use those numbers to look at what the difference would be. Because yeah, if we're talking about like, you know, $200 here, $25 there, like I don't care. But if we are talking more about like a couple $1,000, I'm sure there are some libraries that care. Yeah, I mean, I am happy to do anything we can to support our less funded libraries. This in particular would feel not like laundering. It's like almost a direct like redistribution of tax dollars if we're like holding the money for, you know, a year and then pushing it back. But again,
maybe the way we address what I'm talking about more is in point number 9 with the member fees, if we decide we want to do that, and not in this mechanism.
Yeah, I'm struggling with the notion of, I'm concerned about getting anywhere that's annual rebates. And it goes back to something Rebecca and I were talking about yesterday, which is the Rails grant to the LSAPs. And the way we in CCS budget for that Rails grant is that it goes into the development fund. Whereas when I was in Swan, it was in the operating fund, and it significantly impacted people's annual membership fees. And so we'd have to wait until we found out how much we were getting from Rails, and then your membership fee may go up and down. And because Rails just recalculated how they do that, Swan is going to get a whole lot less. And the Swan membership is up in arms because they kind of rely on that. And so when Rebecca explained why this was done this way, that it's put into development fund specifically so that, you know, we're not relying on that money, I would be concerned about libraries sort of getting into this habit of expecting a rebate and maybe not being able to budget for their full amount if we decide we need to start building up that development fund for something. Does that make sense? I would rather see us say every, like, I think it's, I don't know if it's Lyra or Limerick, one of them, it was like every 5 years we decide whether or not there's a rebate available.
Yeah, that must be Limerick, because Lyra does an annual rebate.
Okay, I think it's Limerick that we would get one every 5 years.
I guess the way I'm viewing this policy is a lot more like a guideline. Like I wouldn't use the word annual or rebate in the policy. I would word it to say the goal of the development fund is to maintain 125% of the anticipated annual development fund expenditures. Or the goal of the development fund is to maintain a balance in the range of 125 to 175% of annual expenditures. And then the committee would be able to look each year and say, okay, are we how are we in that goal? Are we, are we comfortable with the 125 this year? Are we above the 175, but we still think it's okay because it's only a goal. We would not be obligated to do anything. And we wouldn't put into any wording that we're doing a rebate or we're doing anything annually. It wouldn't obligate an action of any kind.
That sounds closer to what I'm thinking. I think the notion of the rebates is lovely. At the same time, kind of taking what Mick was saying about equity to a different angle here. I mean, I think the purpose of this development fund, the real benefit of that to the smaller libraries is that we're stronger together as this consortium, and we can offer resources to our communities that we wouldn't be able to afford on our own. And the development fund is like our special reserve fund that allows us to plan in advance for a lot of strategic initiatives that we wouldn't ordinarily be able to do. If we put some arbitrary figure on top of this, we might exclude ourselves from being able to do something that would really benefit the organization as a whole. So I mean, I really believe in this development fund, and I like seeing the strategic thought that goes behind this. I wouldn't want to unnecessarily cripple it by putting, some percentage on it or building in this notion of expected rebates. So I might be a little bit more alone in this notion of trying to maintain a fund balance that would exceed what would be 125% of what our annual operating revenue would be in there. But I like the idea of the development fund, and I would like to see us continue to grow that and to talk more about what our strategic initiatives are and how we can serve our 28 members. I think CCS has been developing so much here in the last couple of years. I mean, with the addition of cataloging and UX, there's a lot of great ideas that are coming out of our group, and I think that there's a lot for us to benefit from. So that's just kind of where I'm coming from on this. Is I think that's where the equity is in the strength of what we can do with our fund balance. So rebates are great, but I don't think we need to commit to it.
Yeah, I think that committing to a rebate is just a bad precedent. Why collect it to begin with? That sort of a thing.
So back to Rebecca's question about the percentages of rebate. If we choose to do a rebate, and there's no promise that we will be doing a rebate, especially the way that I'd like to have Lauren the policy written, and I think Anthony makes really strong points there. But if we choose to do rebates, I would be totally fine with it being a percentage of going in versus even Steven. And I think that makes sense. People get in because it's just like change. You're getting your change back. And so if someone puts more money in, they should get more money out, and not, it's like when you eat at restaurants when you were in high school with friends and some of them were cheapskates and they wanted to put everything in money, but you're like, I only got a water. Why am I putting in $10? Maybe you didn't have friends like I did. But that's how I see it. So Rebecca, you've convinced me. Anthony, I think you've got a good point. And when we start reviewing the policy as Rebecca writes it up, I think we should really have that discussion. And it's like, okay, if it's actually 150% we want, then there probably won't be rebates very often. And I think I agree, as we write this up in the notes, people can read that we think rebates are not something people should rely upon. That it's a nice surprise when it does happen.
I think I have pretty good direction on what we need for the next meeting to come back to this. So I will do some spreadsheets and some drafting, and we can talk about it again next month.
Thank you. So we want to talk about member fees, 21-22 member fees.
For OCLC, we get our total OCLC bill from OCLC, and then we divide that to all members based on their collection or their materials budget. Last year, I went ahead and made a unilateral decision to make it the past 3 years of their materials budget an average, so it matches how we were doing their tax data, and that just helps account for like, oh, we added this new resource, or we increased or decreased our budget, so people just had fewer fluctuations. But every year we get a lot of questions about like, well, what do we include in that materials budget? And this is something we have been asking members to self-report because the prevailing sort of idea is that what is reported to IPLAR or other, sort of central data sources really varies library to library, like what folks are including. So CCS for many years has used this like worksheet that they send out, that we send out, and say like, send us your collection info. And what we've been saying is for any resources that have title level records in the database. So that's all of your print stuff, right? Catalog all those. And then for electronic materials, we've been asking that people include resources like Overdrive that have, title by title records in PowerPack, but not like LinkedIn Learning, which you may have a record for LinkedIn Learning, but you don't have a record for every course that LinkedIn Learning has in the database. What I like about that is that it, keeps some balance between libraries who may be more focused on e-resources and libraries who may be more focused still on sort of traditional physical materials. My concern is that I don't really have a way of confirming that those numbers are reported correctly. I don't think anyone's trying to like scam their neighbors, but I think it's confusing. And we have a list, and I can refer people when they ask to this list of like, here's what we have title level records for you. But I would be surprised if like 80% of the libraries were accurate. It feels like a big ask to say, go through your collection budget and like, give me these numbers. So as folks who I asked to give me those numbers, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, what if we based it, I'm just throwing this out. What if we based it on something you do have access to, which is the actual number of titles, instead of the budget that we're spending on those titles?
Yeah, I think I'm not saying that's not a good idea. I can pull those and look at that, and I can do a comparison for the next meeting. One thing that people have, I think this is less of an issue now than it has been before, because so much has been like normalized of like, of course we want a catalog record for that. But I do know that when I started at CCS, there were libraries that were deliberately not cataloging things because they're like, oh, well, when we have more items, we have to pay more for CCS, which was not true then, and is not true now. And we've tried to add some more transparency around that. Again, I don't think anyone at this stage in the game is like, oh, I want to hide stuff from my patrons so I don't have to pay a few more pennies to CCS. But I think that is kind of why we looked at budget numbers instead of total titles. But I wrote that down as something I can do a comparison on for our current. I can look at what we're doing now and then what that would look like as well.
With titles, things can change really quickly with them. I know some of our libraries are doing remodels and things where they go through a huge weed. And then there's other libraries that have done a very poor job cleaning out their records. And so in some ways, I think that you'll maybe it's it has people cleaning out the records better, but I don't think that this is the right mechanism to do that. And so I kind of go back and forth on that. So I think it's an interesting idea, though.
Mick, when we did this in Swan, they used a 3-year average because of the fact that you might add a huge collection or you might do a massive weed before a renovation. So they tried to smooth that out with a 3-year average. And you're right, it did sometimes encourage people to get better at weeding. Maybe not the best mechanism for it, but it was a nice reminder at budget time.
Do any of you have concerns about how we've been doing OCLC? Is this something that's come up, or you're like, oh, I hate pulling these numbers, or I'm pretty sure my staff just make them up. Like, we don't have to change it. I just wanted to put it in front of the committee.
It was confusing for us at first when you first asked us for those numbers, I will say. But I'm sure we'll get used to it if you guys all have. Or we'll be one of the, 80% that's really not reporting accurately because we don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, we do track kind of like year to year. And if we see a really big change, we'll go back to the library and say, hey, you're like 50% less than you were last year. Did you really cut your collections budget by 50%? Or did you forget to include something this year? So we do try to do some like general QC on it. But yeah, it's just, like when we were looking at our member fee structure, like all of these metrics are just stand-ins for like, what are you putting in and what are you getting out? So I think we could argue for days and not have much of a difference. So if most people are comfortable, I'm happy to just leave it as it is. It doesn't sound like anyone has a concern about using a 3-year average.
No concern.
Okay, we'll keep on keeping on.
I understand that Palatine has a big OCLC bill, so perhaps we should separate that out and let them still pay it.
Oh, no. Palatine has a $340 OCLC bill, and because they have joined CCS, now they have a big OCLC bill.
Never mind.
Yeah, it was 340 and then it went to 23,000.
Who was it that was at like 23,000 when they came? It was Grays Lake. That was like the opposite. Somebody had a really large one.
Morton Grove had a really big bill, and when they came, then other members were like subsidizing their bill, and now Palatine is the opposite, coming in with a tiny bill and subsidizing everyone else.
This is
Further
crazy.
proof that OCLC just makes up numbers off the top of their head.
Yeah, Palatine is now my favorite comparison. So Palatine is a standalone, paid $340. Highland Park, if they were a standalone, would pay $30,000 to OCLC. Why? I mean, like, I know why, we don't need to get into it, it's real annoying, but so that is why we redistribute those within CCS. One of our steps towards equity.
Thank you.
Palatine. Yeah, I don't really have anything on tax data. We've started to collect the data for this year so we can do our math for next year. Beth, you haven't had any problems. You got everything you were expecting, right?
So far. Mm-hmm.
Cool. So that too, we use that 3-year average, and I anticipate having a draft for you at our next meeting.
Great.
That's everything I have, unless the committee has any other questions or concerns or anything you'd like to bring up.
None at this time. Anybody else? All right, then it's 11:21. I will adjourn this meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.